Hi and welcome to another vlog. The past few days have been quite difficult for many people because we've lost two icons of our time. George Michael and Carrie Fisher have died in the past few days, both very young, 53 and 60 years of age, and both absolutely huge as far as fan bases go. And I always think at Christmas, and for anybody who's experienced a loss at Christmas, you can't help but recognise that even though it's terrible to lose somebody that you love at any time of the year, there seems to be a real juxtaposition at Christmas. Everybody's enjoying themselves, spending time with their loved ones, and for some people the feeling is completely the opposite. It's desolate, isolated and quite tragic. And I just want to recognise that if you're somebody who's maybe watching this and Christmas hasn't been that ideal for you, that there are people out there who really understand and recognise that this is incredibly difficult for you. But for those of us who've been affected by George Michael and Carrie Fisher's loss, I think that there's something quite beautiful about united grief. You know, very rarely do we allow ourselves, particularly in the Western world, to demonstrate our feelings and also to explore the very rough territory of grief. It's a very difficult place to navigate, and all of us are going to go through very significant losses, and many people watching this will have already gone through many significant losses, and you can't protect yourself against it. And very often we don't like to talk about it because we almost feel that if we talk about it, we're either opening the wounds for those people who may have suffered losses, but also almost tempting fate. And I can relate to that. You know, I can relate to the fact that there are people in my life that I recognise have gone through some real serious losses. And knowing how to talk about the person that they've lost and knowing how to open up that communication without firstly bringing them down or secondly overstepping the boundaries can be quite difficult. But my advice is very simple. We see this when we lose an icon like George Michael or Carrie Fisher. We see that in that moment where we share our emotional discourse, where we start to explore with like-minded people the impact of that loss, we feel comforted. We feel a real sense that other people understand where we are and how we feel. And the loss isn't diminished, but the sharing makes you feel a sense of care. And I think that's the big difference about losing somebody who's an icon and been shared by millions of us in the press and losing somebody really significant personally. I think that for some reason we're so excellent at demonstrating our feelings when there is this global loss. But when it comes down to our neighbour who loses their husband, or somebody at school who loses their child, or in our own lives we lose a parent, very often, as opposed to feeling that the experience is shared and having that common support, often people feel that they're left alone. And for me, the biggest advice and also the sentiments that I take from losing icons like George Michael and Carrie Fisher is that the evidence is very clear. The more we share our grief, the more we're unafraid to have those very difficult, challenging conversations, the more ready we are to go and knock on that neighbour's door or to make sure that in the schoolyard you ensure that you talk to that parent who's gone through a significant loss, then the chances are that we don't take the grief away, but we certainly reduce the isolation, we share the pain, we offer the community, and we enable that person to see that their experience matters, that their loss counts, and that whilst we might not be in it with them, we want them to know that we're willing to share that burden. And time again in therapy, I meet people who've had horrible losses, tragic losses, traumatic losses, and always the same sentiments are shared, that the most painful part of the process of dealing with the loss is feeling that people don't want to talk about that person, the person that was so significant, that shared their life, that they loved, that suddenly is silenced because people struggle to say the words, "I'm sorry," or "I know you've gone through a tragic loss, let me be there for you," or simply taken around a pot roast and left it on the step to make sure that that person knows that they're not on their own. So in our shared experience of losing these icons and recognising how caring and supporting one another really does make things a little bit less difficult to bear? Why don't we extend that in our communities? Why don't we start having those difficult conversations with people who've lost, and also recognise the losses that we have when we need to talk about those with people around us that we always worry about, won't want to hear our feelings because, you know, you should be over it. Chances are, for most of us out there, we've all gone through it. So let's learn the lessons that we need to help people cope with grief. And as this is about George Michael and Carrie Fisher, just a recognition that they were two amazing human beings who touched so many of our lives, and let's hope they rest well.